The frost came early that October. I remember because my wife had been gone exactly 6 months that morning, and I was standing at the kitchen window watching the maple in the backyard shed leaves onto a thin crust of white, thinking how much she would have loved it. She always loved the first frost, said it made the world look like it was holding its breath. I'm 68 years old. I built a small chain of hardware stores across 3 counties in upstate Vermont over 41 years, starting with a single shop my father left me in a town called Brattleberry when I was 26. We sold nails and lumber and snow shovels and the kind of advice you can only get from people who've actually fixed something with their hands. My wife, she did the books for 32 of those years. She was better at numbers than I ever was, and she was better at people too. When she passed in April, I felt like somebody had taken out half the foundation and expected the house to keep standing. My son is 41. He came home for the funeral and stayed 2 weeks, then went back to his life in Boston, where he runs a marketing firm with his partner, a man I've known since they met in college. They've been together 19 years. I've never once doubted that boy's heart or his judgment. He calls me every Sunday at 4 o'clock without fail, has done it for 20 years, and I know my son. My daughter is 36, and she is the reason I'm telling this story. She married a man 11 years ago. I'll call him my son-in-law because using his name still sticks in my throat. He was charming the way certain men learn to be charming, the way a salesman learns to mirror you back to yourself, until you believe he's the only person who's ever really listened. My wife saw through him in about 10 minutes the first time we had him over for dinner. She told me that night, lying in bed with the lamp still on, that something about him made her teeth itch. That was her phrase. Teeth itch. She used it maybe 4 times in our entire marriage, and every single time she was right. I told her she was being protective. I told her our daughter was a grown woman, 25 years old, with a master's degree in social work, and a good head on her shoulders. I told her we needed to give him a chance. My wife looked at me and said, "I hope you're right, honey. I really do." And then she turned off the lamp. She wasn't right. I was wrong. And it took me 11 years and a phone call I never wanted to receive to understand just how wrong. Let me back up. My daughter and her husband had 2 children, a boy who's 9 now and a girl who's 6. They lived in a development outside Burlington, one of those new neighborhoods where every house has a 2-car garage and a lawn that nobody can quite figure out how to keep alive. My son-in-law worked in commercial real estate. My daughter had given up her social work job when the first baby came, which was something I never questioned at the time, but which I think about a lot now. She loved that work. She used to come home and cry about kids in the foster system, and then she'd go right back the next morning. She was made for it. And then one day she wasn't doing it anymore. And I don't remember exactly when the conversation happened where she told us she was quitting, only that her husband was the one who explained the reasoning to us while she nodded. That should have been the first sign. There were others. I missed them all. The frost morning I mentioned, the one 6 months after the funeral, I was making coffee when my phone rang. The number was blocked. I almost didn't answer. I was 68, recently widowed, and the last thing I wanted was a robocall about my car's extended warranty. But something made me pick up. Maybe just the loneliness of the kitchen. A woman's voice. Soft. Careful. She asked if I was, who I am. Used my full name, and when I said yes, she said, "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not hang up. Your daughter is in trouble. Real trouble. And she can't tell you herself." I almost did hang up. I thought it was a scam. I thought it was somebody trying to get my bank information by playing on my grief. I said, "Who is this?" She said her name was a name I didn't recognize. She said she had been my daughter's neighbor in Burlington for 4 years. She said she had watched things happen across the cul-de-sac that she could no longer pretend she hadn't seen. She said she was calling me because she was leaving the country in 2 weeks for a job in Singapore, and she couldn't carry it with her anymore. She said, "He hurts her. He has been hurting her for a long time, and I think he's getting worse." I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't remember choosing to sit down. My legs just stopped working, and I went down hard, with the coffee still in my hand, and somehow I didn't spill it, which I remember thinking was strange. The brain does strange things in those moments. You notice the wrong things. I asked her how she knew. I asked her for proof. I asked her, I think 3 or 4 times to repeat what she'd said. Like, maybe I'd heard her wrong. She was patient with me. She'd clearly rehearsed this. She told me she'd seen bruises my daughter tried to hide under long sleeves in July. She told me she'd heard him screaming at her through an open window one night last summer. Screaming things I won't repeat here. She told me my granddaughter had come over to her house once, 6 years old, and asked if it was normal for daddies to break dishes. She told me she had a video she'd taken it 3 weeks ago, from her kitchen window, of my son-in-law shoving my daughter against the garage door hard enough that her head bounced. She said she could send it to me. She said she would, if I wanted her to, but she warned me that once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, and I had to decide right then what kind of father I was going to be about it. I told her to send it. I'm going to skip what was on that video. I'm going to skip it because I still can't watch it without my hand shaking, and because no one needs me to describe it. What I will say is that I watched it 3 times in a row sitting on my kitchen floor while my coffee went cold, and when I was done I called my son in Boston. And when he answered, the first thing I said was, I need you to come home. Right now. Today. Don't ask why. Just come. He was on the road within an hour. While I waited for him, I did 2 things. I called my lawyer, a man I've worked with for 30 years on business matters, a man who'd handled my wife's estate and who knew my family. I told him what I'd seen. I told him I needed advice, and I needed it fast, but more than that, I needed somebody who would understand what I was going to ask of him over the next few weeks. He said, come in tomorrow morning. Bring everything. That was it. No questions. He'd known my wife. He knew my daughter. I think he understood. The second thing I did was I called my daughter. I didn't tell her what I knew. I told her I was struggling, that the frost had reminded me of her mother, and I asked if she could come up to the house that weekend with the kids. Just her and the kids. I told her I needed family around me. I made my voice break, which wasn't hard, because the voice was already broken. I asked her to please come. She said yes. She also said, and this is the part I think about most, she said, let me check with him. She actually said those words. My 36-year-old daughter with a master's degree, who used to argue with her professors and once organized a protest in high school over a teacher she thought was being unfair, said, let me check with him. And I heard, for the first time, what my wife had heard 11 years ago at our dinner table. I heard the itch in my teeth. My son arrived that evening. He walked in the door, and I just put my arms around him, and we stood there in the entryway for a long time without saying anything. He's not a small man, my son. He played football in high school. He's 6'2", and when I hugged him, I felt how much bigger than me he'd gotten over the years, how the man had grown up around the boy. I had not held him like that since the day of his mother's funeral. We sat at the kitchen table and I showed him the video. He watched it once. He set the phone down. He stood up, walked to the back door, opened it, walked outside into the cold and screamed. He screamed the way men scream when they don't want anyone to hear it, but they can't keep it inside. I let him scream. I waited at the table. When he came back in, his face was red and his eyes were wet, and he sat down and said, okay, what do we do? That's what I love about my son. That's what his mother gave him. When something is wrong, he doesn't waste time asking how it got that way. He asks what we did. Here's what we did. The next morning, we drove to my lawyer's office together. My lawyer is a careful man, methodical, the kind of person who never says something he isn't prepared to defend in writing. He'd already pulled some preliminary information on my son-in-law. He'd run a basic background check overnight, the kind any lawyer can run, and what he showed us made my stomach turn. There were 2 prior protective orders, both from women who had dated him before he met my daughter. Both filed and then dropped within 60 days. My lawyer explained, gently, that this was a common pattern. The kind of man who hurts women learns to make them afraid to follow through, and learns to make them feel that pursuing it will only make things worse. Both orders had been in different counties. Neither would have shown up on a casual search. There was also a civil suit settled out of court 8 years ago, regarding what my lawyer described carefully as a workplace incident. He said he couldn't tell us more without more time and more authorization, but that he'd seen this kind of sealed settlement before, and that it almost always meant the same thing. My lawyer asked me what I wanted to do. He laid out 3 options. The first was to confront my son-in-law directly, which he advised against, because it would put my daughter in immediate danger and tip our hand. The second was to go to the police with the video, which he said was an option, but warned might not result in much without my daughter's cooperation, and which would also tip our hand. The third was to do this slowly, methodically, and to bring my daughter and grandchildren out of the situation before my son-in-law knew anything was wrong. I chose the third option. My son agreed. My lawyer said it would take time, 3 or 4 weeks at minimum. He said he'd need to coordinate with a colleague who specialized in family law and protective custody, that he'd need to document everything, that we need to find the right moment and the right setup, and that under no circumstances was I to let on to my daughter that I knew anything until we were ready. It was the hardest 3 weeks of my life. My daughter came up that weekend with the kids. I watched her come through the door, my own child, the little girl who used to fall asleep against my shoulder in the truck on the way home from the hardware store on summer evenings, and I watched her smile at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I had to pretend I didn't see it. I had to pretend I didn't notice she was wearing long sleeves in a house I keep at 72 degrees. I had to pretend I didn't see her flinch when my grandson dropped a glass of milk in the kitchen, the way her whole body braced for something that wasn't going to happen because her husband wasn't there. My grandson is 9. He's a quiet kid. He reads above his grade level. He wants to be a marine biologist, and he can name every shark in the ocean. That weekend, he sat on the porch with me after lunch on Saturday and asked me, completely out of nowhere, if I thought it was possible for 2 people to love each other and also be afraid of each other. I almost couldn't answer him. I had to look out at the yard for a long time. Finally, I said, "No, buddy. I don't think real love has fear in it. I think when there's fear, the love part isn't working right." He nodded. He didn't say anything else. Then he asked if we could go look at the ice on the pond. My granddaughter is 6. She's a whirlwind. She talks constantly, sings constantly, dances constantly, and she has my wife's exact laugh, which I have not gotten used to, and probably never will. That weekend, she crawled in my lap on Sunday morning while I was reading the paper and asked me in a perfectly conversational tone if I had a hiding spot in my house. She wanted to know in case she needed one when she came to visit. She said she had 3 at her house, and the best one was under the stairs because Daddy was too big to fit. I told her she could hide anywhere in this house she wanted to. I told her this whole house was a hiding spot, if she ever needed one. She thought about that, and then she said, "Even from Daddy?" And I said, "Especially from Daddy." And she nodded and went back to her cereal. I went into the bathroom after that and threw up. My son was there the whole weekend, sleeping in his old room. He played with the kids. He took my daughter for a long walk on Saturday afternoon, and I don't know what they talked about. But when they came back, my daughter's eyes were red and she went straight upstairs and stayed there for an hour. My son came into the kitchen and shook his head at me. "Not yet," his face said, "not yet." When she left on Sunday afternoon, I hugged her and I held on a little longer than I should have, and I told her I loved her. She told me she loved me too. She didn't cry. I wish she had cried. I think if she had cried, I think if she had cried, I would have broken right there and told her everything. The next 3 weeks moved like glaciers. My lawyer worked. My son drove up from Boston every weekend. We built a plan. The plan was this. My lawyer had identified a women's advocate in Burlington, a woman who worked with the police department and the family court, and a local shelter network, all coordinated. She had done this dozens of times. She would be the one to make first contact with my daughter. We would arrange for my daughter to come up to my house for what she'd think was Thanksgiving, 10 days early, on a Saturday in mid-November. We'd ask her to bring the kids for an overnight. My son-in-law had a real estate conference in Hartford that weekend, which we'd confirmed through a colleague of his without him knowing. He'd be 3 hours away and he wouldn't be expecting her home until Sunday night. When my daughter arrived at my house that Saturday, the advocate would be waiting. So would my son. So would my lawyer. So would I. We would sit down with her, all of us, and we would tell her what we knew, and we would tell her she didn't have to go back. We would tell her she didn't have to go back. We would tell her there was a plan. We would tell her she had a place to stay, a lawyer, a protective order ready to file the moment she said the word, and a father and a brother who would do anything she asked. We rehearsed it. My lawyer made me rehearse it because he said I'd want to be angry, and I needed to not be angry. He said the worst thing I could do was make her feel ashamed or stupid, or like she'd let me down. He said victims of this kind of abuse have been told they're stupid every day for years, and they've been told they've let everyone down, and if she heard one note of that in my voice, she'd shut down completely and we'd lose her. I rehearsed not being angry. It was harder than anything I've ever done. The Saturday came. The frost was thick that morning. Real frost, the kind that crunches under your boots. My daughter arrived just before noon. My grandson was in the back seat with a book about whales. My granddaughter was holding a stuffed rabbit. My daughter got out of the car and saw all the other cars in my driveway, and her face changed. She knew. Some part of her knew immediately. I walked out to her. I took her face in both my hands. I said, "Sweetheart, we need to talk. You're safe. The kids are safe. The kids are safe. Come inside." She started crying before we got to the door. What happened in my living room over the next 4 hours is between her and us, and I won't write it here. I'll say that the advocate was incredible. I'll say my daughter listened. I'll say there was a long stretch in the middle where my daughter denied everything, where she defended him, where she said we didn't understand, where she said it wasn't what it looked like, where she stood up to leave and my son blocked the door and said very quietly, "I'm not going to stop you from leaving, but I'm not going to let you leave without knowing we love you." She sat back down. I'll say that at one point, hour 3. She finally just put her head down on her own knees and sobbed in a way I had never heard a human being sob before. I'll say that my grandchildren were upstairs with my neighbor who'd come over to keep them busy, and that we'd been careful to keep our voices down, but that when my daughter finally broke, my granddaughter came halfway down the stairs and stood there and watched. And my daughter looked up and saw her, and the look on my daughter's face when she saw her own child watching her cry, that is the look I will take to my grave. It's the look of a woman realizing what she's been letting happen. The protective order was filed Monday morning. My son-in-law was served at his office in Burlington that afternoon. He called my daughter 47 times that night. Then he called me. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message I'm going to quote a small portion of, because I want it on record. He said, "You don't know what you've done, old man. You don't know what you've taken from me." That was the part that mattered, not what he'd done to her, what we'd taken from him. As if my daughter and my grandchildren were a possession he'd been entitled to. I saved that voicemail. My lawyer was very pleased about it. The legal proceedings took 11 months. I won't drag you through them. There was a custody battle, which we won decisively, in part because of the video from the neighbor, in part because of the prior protective orders, in part because of testimony from my grandson, who was interviewed gently by a child psychologist and who told her, in his own words, things no 9-year-old should ever have to say. There was a financial battle, which was complicated by the fact that my son-in-law had been quietly hiding money for years, including money my daughter had inherited from her mother. My lawyer found most of it. What he didn't find, I decided to let go, because life is short and my daughter was alive. The criminal charges came separately. The civil suit my lawyer had mentioned, the sealed one from 8 years ago, turned out to be from a woman my son-in-law had worked with at a previous company. When the woman heard through a network I will never fully understand that my son-in-law was being prosecuted for domestic violence, she contacted my lawyer and offered to break her NDA. So did the second woman. So did the second woman. So did eventually a third woman none of us had known about. My son-in-law is now in state prison. He'll be there for a while. My daughter has been in therapy for almost 2 years. She started working again last spring, part-time at a nonprofit that helps women leaving abusive relationships. She says she doesn't know yet if she's ready to date again. I told her she doesn't have to decide that for 10 years if she doesn't want to. I told her mother, and I waited until I was 31 and her mother was 29 to get married, and that there's no rush. She and the kids moved into a small house about 12 minutes from mine. My grandson has a marine biology poster on his wall, and he's joined a swim team. My granddaughter has stopped asking about hiding spots. She has, however, started asking when she can come over to my house, which she calls Grandpa's house, where nothing bad happens. That's what she calls it. She came up with that herself. I have not corrected her. I never will. I want to talk about the neighbor for a minute. The woman who called me. She left for Singapore 2 weeks after she called me, exactly as she'd said she would. I didn't talk to her again until almost a year later, when my lawyer tracked her down because we needed her testimony for the custody case. She flew back from Singapore on her own dime to testify. She would not take a penny from me. She said she was doing what she should have done 4 years earlier, and that the only payment she wanted was knowing my daughter was safe. I asked her after the hearing why she'd waited 4 years. She told me she'd tried, twice. She told me she'd left an anonymous note on my daughter's door the first year, which my daughter had probably never seen, because my son-in-law was the one who checked the mail. She told me she'd tried to befriend my daughter at a block party, but that my son-in-law had inserted himself into the conversation and steered my daughter away. She told me she called a domestic abuse hotline once for advice, and the advice had been that without my daughter asking for help directly, there was very little that could be done. She told me that calling me had felt, for a long time, like a violation of my daughter's privacy, like she'd be going around her back. And then one day, watching from her kitchen window, she'd realized that respecting my daughter's privacy was killing her. I think about that a lot, the idea that politeness, that minding your own business, that respecting people's privacy can be its own kind of violence. I think about how many people in my daughter's life, in her neighborhood, at her old job, at her church, at her gym, must have seen something over the years and decided it wasn't their place. I think about how I, her own father, sat across from her at Christmas dinner for 11 Christmases and chose to see what was easy to see. I'm not angry at them. I'm not angry at myself. Not anymore. My therapist, who I started seeing last year because my son told me I had to, has helped me understand that guilt is a luxury you indulge in when you don't want to do the harder work of changing. The harder work is paying attention. Now. Today. Tomorrow. So that's what I do. I pay attention to my daughter. I pay attention to my son. I pay attention to my grandchildren. I pay attention to the women who come through my hardware stores. And once, last spring, I had a conversation with a woman buying weather stripping for a basement window, and something about the way she said the word husband made my teeth itch. I helped her with the weather stripping, and then, very quietly, while I was ringing her up, I told her that we kept a card by the register for a local domestic abuse hotline, and that I'd noticed she might benefit from one, and that I wasn't asking any questions and wasn't going to remember her name. She took the card. She didn't say anything. She left. 6 weeks later she came back, just for screws, and on her way out she put her hand on my wrist and said, "Thank you." That's all she said. I don't know what happened. I don't need to know. I keep those cards by every register in every store now. I told my employees what to look for. We don't make it a big deal. We just keep the cards there. I want to say one more thing, and then I'll let you go. If you're watching this and there is somebody in your life who you're worried about, please, please call. Don't write a note. Don't drop a hint. Don't wait until they ask. Because they're not going to ask. Call the people who love them. Call their father. Call their brother. Call their best friend from college. Call someone who is in a position to act. You will feel like you are being intrusive. You will feel like you are betraying their privacy. You will feel like maybe you're wrong, maybe you're imagining it, maybe you're just being dramatic. Call anyway, and if you are watching this, and you are the one being hurt, I want you to know that there is someone like me out there for you. Maybe it's your father, maybe it's your mother, maybe it's an aunt, maybe it's the neighbor across the cul-de-sac who is going to call out of nowhere one frost morning and change everything. They are waiting for you. They love you. They are not going to be angry. They are not going to be ashamed of you. They're going to drop everything and come get you. You just have to let them. The frost came early again this year. Last Saturday, my granddaughter and I were out in the yard, and she crouched down and put her hand flat on a frozen patch of grass and held it there until her palm melted, a perfect handprint into the white. She looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, look, I can leave a mark." And I told her, "Yes, sweetheart, you can leave a mark anywhere you want." And then I had to turn around for a minute because my eyes were watering and I didn't want her to see. And I looked at the maple in the backyard, the same maple I'd been looking at the morning my wife had been gone 6 months and the phone had run. The world was holding its breath. My wife was right about that too. She was right about everything. I just took a long time to listen. I've thought a lot, in the 2 years since that frost morning, about how a man like me could sit across from his own daughter for 11 Christmases and miss what was right there in front of him. I'm not a stupid man. I built a business from one storefront to 17 locations across 3 counties. I read people for a living. And still, I missed it. So I've had to ask myself what kind of looking I was actually doing all those years, because clearly it wasn't the real kind. What I've come to understand is this. Every choice I made, every choice my son-in-law made, every choice my daughter Maeve made, every choice Vera Linwood made, standing at her kitchen window watching across that cul-de-sac, all of those choices were seeds. And seeds grow. They don't care whether you wanted them to grow or whether you forgot you planted them. They grow into what they were always going to grow into. My son-in-law's cruelty grew. His prior victim's silence grew. My polite, hands-off respect for my daughter's marriage grew. Every one of those things became the field we all ended up standing in. I want to be careful here, because I don't believe in fate, and I don't believe anybody deserves what happened to my daughter. But I do believe that what we tolerate, we teach. I taught my son-in-law by being polite at his dinner table that I was a man who would look away. He read me correctly. He was not wrong about me. That is the hardest sentence I have ever had to write. The way out of that field, for me, has been 3 things, and I want to name them plainly. The first is doing the right thing, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you, even when it makes you look like a meddler. That's the moral piece, and there is no shortcut for it. The second is paying real attention to the world in front of you, the kind of attention that costs effort, the kind that notices long sleeves in a warm house and a 6-year-old asking about hiding spots. That is the wisdom piece, and most of us are lazier about it than we'd like to admit. The third is the willingness to keep showing up, day after day, in therapy, in a hardware store, on the phone with your son on a Sunday afternoon, doing the slow work that doesn't have a finish line. That is the grit piece, and I think it is the one most people underestimate. I am 68 years old. My wife is gone. My daughter is rebuilding. My grandchildren are safe in a house 12 minutes from mine. And every morning when I look at that frost on the maple in the backyard, I tell myself the same thing. Pay attention. Tell the truth. Don't look away. The world is full of Vera Linwoods waiting to be brave enough, and Maeves waiting to be saved. Be the man both of them are waiting for.